How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000 and taking a look at the latest runs of the GFS and the European model. It's clear that we have a lot to talk about when it comes to not only a few winter storms that might move through, but potentially a historic snowstorm pattern we could see throughout the eastern half of the United States and even the Midwest as well. So let's first take a look at the GFS model. In my past several videos, I've been talking about the possibilities of clipper systems moving through, bringing some snow showers right over the interior portions of the Northeast. We did have a clipper system move through last night for much of northern New Jersey, brought around an inch of snow in my area, and we do have another clipper system ongoing right now for northern New England. As for the most part, you should expect a general area of 1 to 3 inches of snowfall. So this clipper system shouldn't bring much of any significant snowfall, but the next few snowstorms, like I'm going to show you right now, have the possibility of bringing significant snow. Not only significant snow, but I should say historic snowfall. So let's first take a look at the GFS model. We do have a low pressure system coming off the Pacific Northwest coast, making landfall right around northern California, bringing heavy snowfall to the higher elevations of Oregon as well as northern California. And this is expected to move further eastward, and along with it, there will be a decent amount of instability right over the Midwest. We're going to see that as this clipper system moves through, there's going to be just enough of a pressure gradient to bring that cooler Arctic air further southward right over the Northeast and Midwest. So, of course, once this low pressure system encounters that instability, that cold air is going to force that warmer, humid air mass that's located right around the surface further upwards, because that's just common physics. It's equivalent to, let's say, having something with lighter air pressure, like let's say a beach volleyball underwater. Of course, the water, it has a lot more of a higher pressure, so it's going to force that lower pressure area, such as the beach ball in this scenario, upwards till the pressure is at its even point. And that's exactly what's going to happen right here. And along with that lower pressure comes a lot of humidity and condensation, and that's what we exactly see, where we see an area of snowfall develop. Now, this would be one of our lighter snowstorms we're going to talk about in this video, which really goes to show you how significant the next few snowstorms have the potential of being. So this would happen right around Thursday. We should begin to see the snowfall develop, that instability really increase, and over portions of Minnesota, Wisconsin, headed into North Dakota and into Michigan. You should mainly expect light snowfall. It shouldn't be very heavy for you guys, because while there is a decent amount of instability, it isn't necessarily very strong instability, and there isn't a lot of cold air behind it to supply it with more instability. As if we were to continue to move forward, we see that this low pressure system originated from the southern portion of the Pacific, or at least relative to the United States, which means that it's unlikely that there's going to be a ton of cold air behind it thanks to that. And there's not going to be a strong ridge right here to increase that pressure gradient, to increase that instability. So the snowfall rates will be relatively light, but you should still expect an area of 1 to 3 inches of snowfall for much of the northern Midwest for much of Thursday, and then headed into the late Thursday into early Friday time frame. We see that snowfall move into the Northeast. Now, this snowfall could impact the more populated areas of the Northeast, where New York City could get involved, the metropolitan area of New York City as well, like northern New Jersey. And of course, much of New England is likely to receive accumulating snowfall from this. We see, again, the snowfall isn't very heavy, but I should point out that the instability does increase just by a little bit by the time this approaches the Atlantic. So we could see heavier snowfall rates than what you were seeing right over the Midwest. So we could be talking more closer to the 3-inch range rather than the 1-inch range you were seeing in northern Midwest. So in places like Hartford, Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, into Albany, and pretty much of upstate New York, and the entire portion of New England in general, pay close attention to expecting anywhere between 1 to 3 inches of snowfall for much of southern and western New England. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see 3 to 6 inches of snowfall further northward in the areas where it'll be entirely a snow event and where the snowfall rates would be a little bit more heavy, such as in places like Maine, New Hampshire, as well as Vermont. And the certainty is very high with this storm system. We're only at the 78-hour mark, so there isn't a lot of time for the forecast to really adjust, or for the computer models, for the factors to really for the computer models to really ingest the factors to the point where there could be some huge changes in the forecast. Based on how the atmosphere looks right now, the atmosphere could get an accurate representation of what's going to happen in the future. And if we were to take a look at the European model, very similar forecast, which makes me highly confident with this. It's almost identical just looking at the two directly, where we see the rain snow line at very similar locations for much of central Pennsylvania and into southern New Jersey. It should start as a snow event for New York City before changing into a rain event in New York City. And same goes for southern New England, but pretty much anywhere that's just north of the Interstate 90 corridor between Boston and Albany, that's where it's most likely going to be entirely a snow event for you guys. And it's, like I said, the cold air is going to be to the east of this storm system, so the snowfall should be very front loaded before it changes over to rain. In terms of the amount of snowfall you should expect from this first snowstorm of many that we could potentially see over the next few weeks. So taking a quick look at that, we see pretty much a decent area, I'll say, of 1 to 3 inches of snowfall. Keep in mind the GFS model for this ratio includes sleet as well as freezing rain accumulation, which isn't really representative of how much snowfall you're going to experience. So in the areas south of Philadelphia, you could pretty much ignore this area of 1 to 3 inches of snowfall, as this should primarily only impact these areas with around 1 to 3 inches of snowfall, and potentially a little bit more than that in the interior portions of the Northeast, where you could experience closer to 3 to 6 inches. But New York City, as well as northern New Jersey and much of New England, expect 3 to 6 inches of snowfall from this. And then for much of the Midwest, expect mainly 1 to 3 inches of snowfall from this. However, this is just only the beginning, because we have another snowstorm that could happen right around Sunday timeframe, because as this low pressure system passes through, it's going to bring a decent amount of cold air behind it. We do have a ridge located right around the eastern Canadian region as well as the eastern United States, and it's just going to push this Arctic air down to the United States. So we're not done yet, and we're far from done if we're being honest here. So it's going to be quite a while before we're done with snowfall. So let's take a look at the 18Z run. So we have another potential snowstorm, and based on the trajectory of this, it seems like the GFS and the European model are developing this storm system in a very similar fashion. The only key difference I see is that the GFS model is bringing that snowfall further southward, and there's less instability, so the snowfall rates aren't as strong. But while the European model is taking the storm further northward, which would enhance the instability thanks to a stronger amount of ridging, but it also expects a stronger amount of cold air behind this storm system, which would enhance the snowfall rates and bring a much more significant winter storm for northern New England. So here's a look at the GFS model first before I get into the European model. So we see another trough coming off the California coast, and then eventually, like I said, there's going to be a decent amount of cold air right in front of it, but we should see just enough ridging develop in the southeast for that southerly warm flow to enhance that instability, where we do see some snowfall develop right over the Midwest. So we see that snowfall move over North Dakota. Wyoming gets involved with right around 1 to 3 inches of snowfall. Same goes for northern Utah into northern Nevada, northern California as well. And same goes for places like South Dakota. Maybe the extreme portions of Iowa could get involved with 1 to 3 inches of snowfall, but it's going to be a very narrow area of snowfall, at least initially speaking, before we eventually see this area of snowfall rapidly expand by the time it encounters that instability along the East Coast. So here's that snowfall. It's going to be fairly light snowfall for much of the Great Lakes region, where Chicago, Milwaukee, into Detroit, northern Indiana, and northern Ohio. This is where you should primarily expect 1 to 3 inches of snowfall. But by the time this approaches the Northeast, where we see this storm system does become a little bit stronger, it could be more than that, more like 3 to 6 inches of snowfall. But let's take a look at the European model's forecast now, and you're going to see a pretty clear difference between the two. So here it is. We see the European model is taking a more expansive area of snowfall, and we see a stronger amount of ridging. So this forces snowfall a little bit further northward. So in the areas where you are experiencing entirely a snow event, such as places like in Chicago, northern Indiana, Detroit, it would be a more difficult forecast for you guys to really determine if you're going to experience accumulating snowfall, because the storm system's trajectory is just a tad bit further northward. But like I said, that does enhance the instability, so we do see heavier snowfall rates, where we'd be talking more about a 3 to 6 inch snowfall threat rather than a 1 to 3 inch snowfall threat for the Great Lakes region. So in places like Minneapolis, into Green Bay, Wisconsin, into Michigan, you should expect 3 to 6 inches of snowfall in the European model scenario. And by the time this approaches Northeast, we could be talking about not only just a mid-range snowstorm, but potentially just an extreme snowstorm, where we'd be talking about over anywhere between 6 to 10 inches of snowfall for much of northern New England. While, like I said, the areas further south, or like in New York City, where you were experiencing accumulating snowfall in the GFS Model 6 scenario, is not experiencing much snowfall, really. Maybe initially speaking, we do see a 1 to 3 inches of snowfall before changing over to rain, but it's looking like the snowfall will be focused in more towards New England. But places like New York City, and Philadelphia would still experience accumulating snowfall in the European model scenario, which gives me a bit more confidence that these cities will experience accumulating snowfall regardless of which scenario is correct. And like I said, both snowstorms are developing in a very similar fashion. It's only that the European model is a tad bit further northward. So I do think that we're going to see a snowstorm in this sort of fashion. The rain-snow line will be key, of course. So in those areas where you're close to the rain-snow line, definitely stay tuned for more updates. But if you're a tad bit to the north of the European model's rain-snow line, you should expect a high certainty that you're going to receive a snowfall threat. How much snow? That's always yet to be seen, depending on how much instability the computer models are forecasting. Are we experiencing more of a European model scenario or a GFS model scenario? That's still yet to be seen. But at the very minimum, you should expect 1 to 3 inches of snowfall for Michigan, Wisconsin, and into New England. And New England, this could be more significant over the next few days. So I'll certainly keep you guys updated once you get more certainty with that forecast. But we're not done yet. There's another one that is expected, believe it or not, to be worse than this one I just showed you, including the European model's case, where it was bringing quite a bit of snowfall to New England. So let's take a look at that. Let's first take a look at the GFS model's forecast when it comes to this storm system. So this would easily be the most significant and just the most widespread for much of the United States. So we have another Clipper system that's going to move down the Pacific coast, as well as an upper level low that's going to be very barely visible by the time it approaches California, before it eventually moves further eastward. And then that's when it'll become very visible at that point, once it encounters that higher instability we see. Because once this first storm system moves past, we're going to still see that ridging build, that strong southerly flow, and we're going to see that inflow of cold air from the polar vortex dip just far south enough to where we see a significant winter storm develop, where this would produce heavy amounts of snowfall throughout the Midwest and into the Northeast as well, where we see New York City, Philadelphia, into the Baltimore area, Washington, D.C. get involved with snowfall, and like I said, the Midwest, where Chicago, Indianapolis, Des Moines, Omaha, into Kansas City as well, Cleveland, and Detroit, all experience just a very impactful snowstorm out of this, as this would definitely be very significant. And I'll say especially for the Northeast, where we'd be talking about close to a foot of snow in all the major cities in the Northeast, including all the more populated areas as well. So this would be very significant. This is a very long range forecast. Keep that in mind. We're going around a little bit more than around 7 to 8 days out. So there's still a lot of time for the forecast to really get a bit more certain. But what makes me a bit more certain with the forecast, despite being that far out, is that the European model is taking a fairly similar scenario where it does develop it in a very similar fashion. We see Clipper system move south from the Pacific, enhancing that instability, and we see the snowfall impact much of the Midwest and still brings a significant winter storm to the Northeast right around the Wednesday, February 12th timeframe, where this would be very impactful. Like I said, close to a foot of snow in many areas of the Midwest. So, but the key difference in the European model scenario is that the ridging is going to be decently weaker just to the east of this storm system by the time we approach the midweek of next week, which would mean that this Clipper system would be able to move further southward before it encounters instability, which means that the snowfall would impact areas further southward. So places like Kentucky into the mid-Atlantic and even into the more southern Midwest states, even as far south as St. Louis, maybe Oklahoma as well, would get involved, while the areas further northward, like in Chicago and Detroit, it would be a less impactful snow event because the snowfall is focused in a little bit further southward. So we're going to need to definitely pay close attention to the height anomalies over the next few days. Here's the European model's height anomaly by the time we approach February 12th, the 12Z portion on Wednesday. But taking a look at the GFS model's scenario at the exact same time period, let's take a look at the 18Z run, the 12, we see that the ridging is quite a bit stronger, which would mean that this storm system would bring the snowfall further northward and more impact the states further northward. So we're going to definitely keep in mind with how the ridging builds over the next few days. And what will be actually key in this is this first snowstorm, because if this first snowstorm ends up taking more of the GFS model scenario, we should expect a stronger ridge, at least initially, which should allow the storm system move, the second snowstorm to move further northward. While if the European model scenario was correct, where the ridging was a bit stronger earlier on, that's when we should expect a weaker ridge later on, because that would mean this storm system would produce more of a jet stream dip for our next storm system move southward and impact the areas further southward. So I'll certainly keep that in mind over the next few days, and I'll keep you guys updated once we get more certainty with the forecast. But that's not the only snowstorm we're going to take a look at. I know it seems never ending, because let's take a look at the 18Z run. Here's that, because there could be another one right behind it that would impact more of the Midwest, and it would be quite powerful and quite historic in some cases, historic blizzard. And then we have another potential winter storm that could be the worst of them all, which is very much in the long-term future. I won't go too in detail with this in this video, because there's still a lot of time for that forecast to really get itself together. So I'll certainly keep you guys updated once we get a bit more certainty with this forecast. But when it comes to the potential of a second snowstorm behind this one that could happen on February 12th, it really all depends on if the GFS model ends up being correct, where we see more of that cold air, where we see more instability in general for that to occur, or where the European model scenario is correct, where we see the ridging weaker, which would mean that this second storm system wouldn't dip as far south enough to really enhance, or there will be a little bit too much cold air for the instability to exist in the European model scenario, which I'll show you guys right now. So here's a European model scenario. The second snowstorm doesn't really develop, mainly because the jet stream is rather stabilized for the most part. There isn't a ton of ridging just to the east of this storm system, which doesn't really bring enough instability for that to occur. So definitely I will keep you guys updated over the next few days. A lot to talk about, so definitely stay tuned. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.